my channel, RPG Retro Reviews, where old school still rocks. Today I'm going to finish up my review series of the new 5th editions of Dungeons & Dragons with the Dungeon Master's Guide. I meant to get to this review weeks ago, so for those of you who have been waiting for this review, sorry about the delay. But let's go ahead and get right into it, shall we? This book weighs in at a whopping 320 pages, and very nicely bookends the 3-volume set with the other 2 books of the series, The Player's Handbook and The Monster Manual. It's quite possible that this might be the best Dungeon Master's Guide yet, as this edition's version surpasses its predecessors on many levels. It pays homage to its source material, even in many respects harkening back to first edition content and format, while doing what a new edition of the rules should do, updating with the new rules and better artwork. Now, there have been some complaints about page warping, and as you can see here, my copy of the book suffers slightly from this condition, but not horrifically so. By comparison, you can see that the Player's Handbook's pages are flat and aligned. I'm not sure what the cause of this is, and hopefully they'll be able to address this problem in future print runs. That's just a minor nit, really, as the content of the book is well worth the price. As the book's title indicates, this is a book for Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Masters or referees, and if you're not planning on running a game, then you can skip this book entirely. If you are a player and don't DM, then I would advise you to not even look at this review, where you might ruin some of the wonder and mystery that Dungeons & Dragons offers, and let this book's fantastic content come out in your Dungeon Master's campaign. As with the other 2 volumes, this Dungeon Master's Guide also has an amusing disclaimer, which I'll go ahead and read to you now. Wizards of the Coast does not officially endorse the following tactics, which are guaranteed to maximize your enjoyment as a Dungeon Master. First, always keep a straight face and say, okay, no matter how ludicrous or doomed the player's plan of action is. Second, no matter what happens, pretend that you intended all along for everything to unfold the way it did. Third, if you're not sure what to do next, feign illness, end the session early and plot your next move. When all else fails, roll a bunch of dice behind your screen. Study them for a moment with a look of deep concern mixed with regret. Let loose a heavy sigh and announce that Tiamat swoops from the sky and attacks. That's what I always do. Well, anyway, the book itself is broken into 3 parts: Master of Worlds, Master of Adventure, and Master of Rules. As I paged through this volume, what struck me is how many ideas sprang into my head for adventures. While you may not use everything presented as laid out, it certainly will inspire you with the sheer volume of information. In the Master of Worlds section, the prospective DM has given several articles on how to work deities into their campaign, the importance of maps and scale, some details on the differences between villages, towns, and cities. Now, let me go ahead and I'm just going to go ahead and page through at this point and kind of give you my impressions on what I feel this Dungeon Master's Guide has to offer. You know, the first couple pages, as with anything, this really is for your novice DMs. But the content on mapping your campaign, scale, settlements, and so forth will certainly lend itself to any Dungeon Master's campaign. And if you would go ahead and look at page 18 of the Dungeon Master's Guide, you get a really nice comprehensive look at different forms of government, which I really kind of recognize this section almost immediately as being analogous to page 89 of the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide, which had an almost identical section presented. Of course, the 5th edition version goes into significantly more detail. Also introduced is on page 22 is a new type of ability called Renown, which you can use this to gauge your character's progress in different factions. And it's a nice little system. I'm not so sure that I would use it, but for those dungeon masters who like this sort of thing, it's a great little tool. And then we go into using magic in your world, which I think is a great section because it really addresses how to referee certain factors of Magic and how it relates to your campaign world, something that Dungeon Masters frequently forget to think about. I'm going to skip all the way up to page 36, and it goes into the different levels of play, different tiers of play, which, as you know, in 5th edition, they've really broken this down into 4 different tiers from levels 1 to 20, with 1 to 4 being your local heroes, 5 to 10 being heroes of the realm, 11 to 16 being masters of the realm, and 17 to 20 masters of the world. Once again, going into some significant detail on how to referee these types of players and what type of play you can expect at these different levels. And this section is really great because it suggests to the DM to figure out exactly what type of fantasy or flavor of fantasy they want to run. And I would advise Dungeon Masters to talk to their players as well and gather their own expectations. For example, if you want to run, say, a heroic fantasy and someone is looking for an epic fantasy type game, and that's not what you're offering, you could really save yourself a lot of time. And this goes into those different types of play that Dungeons & Dragons offers, which also goes into detail on just how flexible this rule set is. One of the things that you'll find about this new Dungeon Master's Guide is just the sheer volume of charts that it has. Many of them random charts. Now, there are those Dungeon Masters who look down with disdain on random charts, but personally, I love them. As the Dungeon Master, I don't always want to know exactly what's going to happen. Sometimes, I'd like to be surprised. But in general, what I'll do is I'll look at the charts and pick something that seems appropriate. If you're drawing a blank and you're having a little bit of Dungeon Master's blockage, especially in the middle of a session, and being able to look at something laid out like this can certainly inspire the Dungeon Master's juices and get you thinking about different things you could offer the players. Now, if we skip over to page 96, once again, we have some great artwork, and we get into the villainous aspect of NPCs. And here, the Dungeon Master is given the framework on how to really create a detailed big bad, so to speak, of the campaign and different villains. I really like the information on the Cleric Death Domain and the Paladin Oathbreaker. Great stuff. It goes into significant detail here. Now, I'm just kind of like skipping through this, and I'm not looking at anything in particular per se, but I just like, there's certain highlights of this volume that I want to point out to you, why you might want to pick this up if you're a Dungeon Master, and it really does fill in the gaps that you know are missing. When you look through the Player's Handbook, there's a significant gap in the rules, and what's missing is the Dungeon Master's Guide, and that really becomes apparent once you hold it in your hand. And wow, if you go on to page 100, there is some more charts, and here we're talking about just some ideas that you might be able to add into your history of a dungeon that you're creating and who the players might encounter. It's really good stuff simply because it gives you a starting point. If you're looking at a blank sheet of graph paper and you really just don't know where to start, you can go ahead and turn to pages like this. And this volume is just full of them. And it will, you can roll a dice if you want, or you can just kind of look through and get inspired. And if we go out to page 120 of the rule book, we'll get into traps. Goes into significant detail on how traps work in this new edition. You know, obviously there's the rules aspect of it, and this isn't really, if you've played 3rd edition, this isn't anything surprising. That's a save DC versus an ability or a skill, so it's not really all that complex. In fact, it's very complex light, so it's easy to Dungeon Master. One of the things about this edition over previous edition, like say 4E, it's not rules heavy. So that's great. It does go into several pages of traps. I could have used a couple more. The sample trap section, I would say, is kind of light, actually. Really only generating 2 pages of actual traps. I think they could have added some more, but obviously they've got to have something to add in for future supplements. And then, of course, Chapter 6 goes into Between Adventures and how to seed future adventures and foreshadowing and keeping track of your campaign and downtime activities, how to craft magic items, and all those kinds of details. Like I said, this really just goes into all the things that a Dungeon Master needs to take care of when they're running a game. Now, guys, as we get into this section, this chapter, this is probably my absolute favorite chapter of the book, and the reason for that becomes obvious when you get to the section on magic items, or Chapter 7, which is on page 133, Treasure. Now, you all, if you've been following my channel, know how much I love First Edition. And I did a complete review on the First Edition Dungeon Master's Guide last year, and you might want to check that out. But really, talk about a homage to First Edition. I cannot stress how great a job they did here. They took what was great about the First Edition Dungeon Master's Guide Magic Items section and actually expanded on it and made it better. Wow, how many times have we been able to say that in a long time? They really did a great job. Going into there are a lot, once again, random charts, lots of random charts, gemstone types, gemstone values, names of different types of gemstone and what they might look like. You can roll randomly, or you can just kind of look through the charts and pick out something that you want to include in your campaign. But what really is just awesome is the charts of random magic items. And if you are familiar with First Edition, you'll remember how great those charts were, how detailed they were, and how many there were, and they are back. It's almost identical in many respects to First Edition in regards to this, and which I just find amazing, because in previous editions they've kind of pushed including magic items in the Dungeon Master's Guide to another book, which I found obnoxious. And they solved that problem big time here, because starting on page 145 and going all the way up to 230. That's right. It's almost 100 pages of magic items included here. And not only did they do a great job detailing these items, but the artwork on the magic items, which I'm going to show you here, is just really something. Wow. If you want to get a nice little visual of what some of these magic items look like and get some inspiration, the magic item descriptions along with the detailed artwork does that for you. Looking at the bag of holding versus the bag of devouring is a little bit amusing. I'm not so sure I would include that type of detail because it would kind of give it away, but it might transform after you put your stuff in there. Who knows? But it's cute. On page 163, one of the more infamous items that you can give your players, a deck of many things. Some really wonderful artwork is included on that. And here we have different charts for how to play that out using regular playing cards. I tend to use tarot cards when I put in a deck of many things, which you can easily do, but it's not that difficult. And some the Avatar of Death statistics is included. If you're familiar with the deck of many things, you know if you draw that, you're going to be fighting somebody. And on page 169, they go into some really nice artwork on the figurines of Wondrous Power, which are just cool. What a great magic item that is. Dritz Do'Urden has a figurine of Wondrous Power we all know. One of the more infamous or famous examples of that in Dungeons and Dragons fiction. 193, some really wonderful artwork on rings and all kinds of different magical rings that players might encounter. And really just magic item after magic item after magic item. Cloaks, staves, wands. It's all included. And artifacts are back. Wow. I am so happy about that. Sentient magic items are really detailed here well. I'm going to pause just a little bit. There's a full-page poster artwork that I really like, which just has what different types of magical components, and it's kind of neat. I could definitely describe this as being in a Sage's or NPC's workroom and set some appropriate atmosphere with this type of artwork. So that's how it might enhance your game if you don't use that type of thing. And let's keep on going. Okay, artifacts. The Hand and Iron Vecna are detailed here in their history, which was really a lot of fun. This is core Dungeons and Dragons lore. The Orb of Dragonkind is included. And we all remember the Sword of Kos. All of these magic items we remember from first edition, and it's part of the lore of the game. And it's important, I think, to harken back to this type of rich tapestry of lore and legend that this game has garnered in 40 years. It's kind of silly, really, when you think about it, to not use this volume of information that they have at their disposal, which I kind of think was brushed over in previous edition. Third edition wasn't so bad. Fourth edition tended to spread it out over book after book after book when it should have been more centralized. And here they've done that. They've gone ahead and included a significant amount of magic items, traps, things that dungeon masters need to know in order to run the game, and not just novice dungeon masters. Any experienced dungeon master will benefit from the content of this book. Now, in part 3, we get into Master of Rules. And this section is really a hacker's guide to Dungeons and Dragons. It's great. It has a lot of alternative rules and options that dungeon masters can introduce into their campaign, and shows and gives good examples on how dungeon masters might alter the rules. And hey, how cool is that we're able to do that again? Even in third edition, which I liked. Y'all know most of you probably realize I did not like fourth edition all that much. And third edition I did like, but I think the consensus there among players is you really were challenged if you tried to change anything, because it would throw other aspects of the game out of balance so easily. And fourth edition was horrific for that. You really couldn't change hardly anything. But here we have running the game and taking care of those different aspects of the game. There goes into a section on ability checks and how to use those. But I'm going to go ahead and skip all the way to page 250. And here we have grid sheets showing you different types of tactical options using miniatures. And it's been stressed that miniatures are not a requirement of 5e, and theater of the mind is definitely encouraged. But if you want to use miniatures, and I'm one of those dungeon masters that absolutely loves the spectacle of miniatures on the gaming table, here are some additional tactical options, and things like flanking are back in the game, and those kinds of roles. Different options for size comparisons, how many squares it takes up, and so forth. Putting facing back into the game. So once again, great section on miniatures and using those types of things. Now, once again, I can't stress enough how much useful information there is here. Page 257 goes into diseases and different maladies that might affect player characters. Chapter 9, Dungeon Master's Workshop, is just more rule hacking. Here we have an option to replace the proficiency system as written with dice. Not something that I'm real big on, but it's an option if you think that might be fun for your campaign. Some people like to roll lots of dice. I'm not one of them. Then, of course, goes into different types of ability checks, hero points, sanity checks, honor, different adventuring options, how to run horror, some ways to hack the healing system, which one of the very first things that I thought that I would adopt was the healer's kit dependency. A character can't spend any hit dice after finishing a short rest until someone expends one use of a healer's kit to bandage and treat the character's wounds. Now, if you look in the player's handbook, you'll find that a healer's kit has 10 uses. So, once again, I'm all about resource management when it comes to dungeon exploration. And the healing system as written, I think, is a little bit too lenient. But I don't want to beat people over the head with resource management either. To me, there's a balance that you have to strike. And this healer's kit dependency is great. It goes right into what I'm talking about. There's a couple other ones that harken back to 4th edition, where you can have using a short rest is 5 minutes long instead of an hour. And you can change the long rest to 1 hour, which, if you liked 4th edition and those rule sets and you like doing it that way, well, there you go, kids. Have at it. On the other hand, it goes into the other extreme, gritty realism. A short rest is 8 hours and a long rest is 7 days. Not so sure I'd want to saddle my players with that one, but if you like that kind of gritty realism, then you can certainly introduce that into your campaign. Rules on firearms, explosives, modern day things. And once again, we get into some fun things harkening back to the 1st edition of the rules, which goes into figuring out alien technology on page 268. Fans of Gamma World will recognize this immediately, and it's kind of a fun little thing where somebody picks up a laser rifle who's only familiar with medieval technology and tries to figure it out. Obviously, that could be great, or it could be disastrous, and you can certainly have fun with that. We always did back in the day. And now we go into some combat options on page 270. Here you have variances on initiative. They even have an option to add speed factor into your initiative, something that I'm a little bit worried about as far as I wouldn't use it, simply because of the time it takes. I'm all about utilizing software to take care of initiative. When I'm at the table, I use a software option, which I'll probably talk about at some point in another video. But that when we talk about the integration of digital technology with tabletop gaming, initiative is one of those things that can most certainly be relegated to a computer and save the DM his brain from trying to keep track of various combat conditions and hit points of monsters and run a bunch of different creatures at the same time where the players are only using one. Frees up the DM to go ahead and utilize some real tactics and be able to think out his strategy when dealing with player character combat, which if you are running multiple characters versus people who are running only one character, that can certainly be a challenge very quickly. Now we go to page 274, and this goes, now we're into the section on creating monsters from scratch. If you were looking at the monster manual and you were looking at the challenge rating of the creatures, you might have been scratching your head at how they arrived at those numbers. I mean, I certainly was. And once you open this section, it becomes apparent how they did it. It's not a straightforward numerical calculation as you might have thought. There's some flexibility and the Dungeon Master's options on how to create a appropriately challenged creature for your group from scratch. And this goes into it. It's very detailed. There are quite a few steps to creating a monster from scratch. 20 steps, actually. Some of them a little bit superfluous, like languages. I mean, that's not going to take that long for you to figure out. If you at that point, you should know what kind of creature you have. And then it goes into stat blocks. There's also a 2-page section on page 280 and 281 going into all kinds of monster capabilities that they might have with example monsters who use those abilities. So that's very, very handy. Now, also included on page 286 are some example races, like the Eladrin and the Asimar are back here in the Dungeon Master section. I really like the Eladrin. I think they're a great optional race from 4th edition, and here they are back again. So those who are missing them in the Player's Handbook, here you go. Page 290, we get into the appendices. The first appendix is Random Dungeons. Wow, I never thought I'd see this in a Dungeon Master's Guide again. But here it is for those of us who are 1E fanatics like myself, and remember how much fun it was to sit there with your friends and roll a dungeon randomly at play. You can do that. It is a bit more time consuming, but if you enjoy that type of thing, you can certainly actually run a random dungeon from these charts. But more importantly, and the more practical usage of this, is to just kind of look through the various charts presented and get some ideas on what you might do in your own dungeon. The death traps, the different types of dungeon types like maze or a mine, or it's a stronghold. Is it a temple? Is it a tomb? What kind of treasure does it have? What kind of magic items are there? What is the motivation of the monsters that reside there? What kind of hazards might the player characters encounter? And if you haven't thought about that, or you're drawing a blank, here are just lists and lists of different types of things. I love sections like this because here you have just massive charts on detailed aspects of the dungeon, such as the general features. Is there a broken bottle lying on the floor? What about cobwebs? Or what does this piece of rotten rope lying here on the ground mean? What about these pottery shards? Where did this bunch of scattered teeth and fangs come from? What's that smell? There's a putrid odor or rotting vegetation. Or there's a sulfur. Ugh, urine. Yuck, maybe the monsters are going potty here, huh? Who knows? But here you have the option to go through and add some detail to your dungeon with these charts. And like I said, I don't actually roll on these charts when I'm looking at them, but I like to look through them when I'm creating my own dungeon, just to get some ideas going on, because I can take just about anything I look at. Like, let's say, for example, you find a comb lying. Whose comb is that? Why did they leave it here? What happened? What was the circumstance that caused somebody or something to leave a comb lying on the ground here? To me, these kinds of details are what really brings flavor and realism to any kind of adventure. Now, the next appendix is Appendix B, and that's on page 302. And now a very useful section here where monsters are listed by climate or environment. So you have Arctic monsters. So monsters that you would find in a cold region are listed. Monsters that live in the desert or a forest are listed. Grassland monsters. So if you are running a section in the outdoors and you're drawing a blank on what the player characters might find here, or you're just looking for inspiration before the game session, this is a great section for you. Previously released as a PDF on page 306 is Monsters by Challenge Rating is included in the DMG. Some mentioned that this was not included in the Monster Manual, but here it is as an appendix in the Dungeon Master's Guide, so that's nice to see there. Appendix C is a very nice section on maps, some full-color maps that the DM can use for inspiration. They can copy them and actually use them. This is another one of those things that I think is more inspiration material rather than actual use material. There's dungeons and coastal towns and lake towns depicted, and these are really, the artwork here is outstanding. And what would you be using these for, and how can you utilize them to inspire your own campaigns? That's what this is good for. And Appendix D is another section on fiction that dungeon masters might use for inspiration. and then following that is the very detailed index. Thankfully, the print is not as small as it was in the player's handbook. Some of us older gamers have to wear glasses anyway. It's not that nice when the print is so small that even with my glasses I'm squinting. This type's a little bit better, so thank you, Wizards of the Coast, for that. And that concludes this review of the Dungeon Master's Guide. I hope you found it useful and enjoyable. And upcoming, I do have some more videos coming out. I do have a top 10 list of retro games as my next video. I'm currently working on that. And if you have any comments, suggestions, please include them below. I'd like to hear from you. Subscribe and look at all my other videos and retro reviews. So, friends, that concludes my review of the Dungeon Master's Guide. I am also going to do a review of the full 5th edition system coming up here shortly as well, now that all 3 books have been released. So until then, my friends, thank you for watching this video, and as always, may your D20 roll true, and game on.